On the night of January 3rd, 1804, a 22-year-old bricklayer named Thomas Millwood sat in a local pub in Hammersmith, England, and irritation crept up his spine. He wasn't known for a short temper. Most evenings he saw the same faces, had a drink, and unwound. But that night the clatter, the laughter, the recycled gossip, especially one topic, grated. When his friends circled back again, Thomas acted on impulse, stood and slammed his mug hard enough to silence the room. He realized he'd overdone it, muttered an apology, grabbed his coat, and made for the door. Someone called, "Hey, be careful out there." He rolled his eyes, tossed a curt, "Yeah, okay," and stepped into the night. He told himself he'd warm up at his parents' house before meeting his wife. She often worked late, and on those nights he walked her home. The path to his parents' place took him along Black Lion Lane, a route he'd walked countless times in bad weather and quiet streets. Hammersmith, about 45,000 people on the outskirts of London, was usually lively and welcoming, drawing wealthy visitors for rest and fresh air. In recent weeks, though, the energy had changed. People shut their doors sooner. Roads emptied early. The talk of the town was a string of strange sightings and alarming encounters, some calling them pranks, others insisting they were attacks. Turning a corner, Thomas nearly collided with two men. One jerked back with a raised club, and the other's hand hovered over a pistol in his waistband. Thomas threw his hands up, palms out. Only then did the club lower and the hand leave the pistol. "It's dangerous to be out here alone," one said, breath puffing in the cold. "You shouldn't be by yourself." Before Thomas could answer, they hurried past. He muttered at the absurdity, picked up his pace, and covered the last stretch to his parents' doorstep. He grabbed the handle out of habit, but the door was locked. He heard movement and then his sister's voice through the wood. "Who's there?" He kept his voice even. "It's me, Anne." That wasn't enough. "I don't know if it's really you," she said. "Step back so I can see you through the peephole." He sighed, backed up, and waited for the latch. The door opened. He stepped in. She locked it quickly behind him and asked the question everyone in Hammersmith seemed to ask first these days. "Well, did you see it?" He had come to warm his hands and avoid the topic, but it followed him here. If he had gone home, he would have heard the same question from his mother-in-law, who lived with him and his wife and followed the rumors closely. For weeks, there seemed no other conversation anywhere. A mysterious figure was plaguing the cemetery and the lanes around it, and people were scared enough to lock doors earlier and walk in groups. 2 months earlier, someone reported a figure lurking in the church cemetery. Within days, it was revealed to be the butcher's son, who had dressed in women's clothing and slipped among the headstones to startle people he knew. Tasteless and foolish, but still a prank. Yet the panic didn't stop. Roughly a week later, a local chimney sweep claimed he saw a figure in the cemetery vanish into the ground. That detail lit the rumors. Some folks laughed, but fewer than Thomas expected. Stories spread fast, and curiosity turned to fear. Then, talk of sightings became accounts of attacks, always late at night near the cemetery, with enough gaps for imagination to fill. One resident said something came up from behind and choked them. They broke free and ran, breath ragged, heart pounding, and insisted it wasn't a man, it was a phantom. Not long after, a driver with 8 horses and 16 passengers stopped his carriage near the cemetery. He stepped down when a horned creature charged. Panic exploded. He fled, abandoning everything. The description, horns, an unearthly presence, kept people talking. By late December, Hammersmith felt coiled with dread. There were so many unnerving accounts that even steady people checked over their shoulders. Thomas, almost alone in his circle, stuck to his view that hysteria had taken grip. Then something undercut his certainty. A pregnant woman died following an encounter. She had been walking alone near the church cemetery at about 10 p.m. when neighbors said something rose from the ground and rushed toward her. She felt it grab her. She remembered turning, the shock of contact, and a white flowing robe with a long pointed white hat. Then everything went black. When she opened her eyes, she was in a neighbor's house, faces crowding around. People nearby had found her passed out and carried her inside. She was conscious only long enough to wheeze out what had happened before she died. That death ended any attempt to downplay events. People who had snickered over the butcher's son's prank stopped joking. The town offered a reward for anyone who could capture or kill the Hammersmith ghost. Night watchmen increased patrols. Some residents began informal rounds too, their fear clamped to duty. Those two men with the club and pistol were an example. Whether aligned with official watchmen or acting on their own, they treated the lanes as if an enemy lurked in the hedges. The ghost, and how to end it, was the only topic in the pub that night, the very topic that had made Thomas slam his mug. He couldn't understand how people thought a ghost could be captured or killed. Ghosts were stories, he said. And even after the butcher's son said he had nothing to do with any encounter except the first and produced an alibi, Thomas remained convinced the rest were the work of a person. Someone had mimicked the prank and taken it too far, with terrible consequences. Near 10 p.m., Thomas sat by his parents' fire. Heat soaked in and made his eyelids heavy. The thought of trudging back into the raw cold to collect his wife felt punishing. A selfish idea edged up: sleep there and let her walk home alone. It would be one night. Nothing would happen. He mentioned it to Anne casually. She reacted as if he'd slapped the table. "Are you serious? You're going to let your wife walk home alone in this environment? She'll be the next victim of the Hammersmith ghost. Get up. Go protect your wife." He didn't want to fight. He raised his hands, stood, and pulled on his jacket. He loved his wife. He loved his sister. He told himself he would move quickly, meet his wife, and get home. Irritation sparked again the instant the night air hit his face. The whole situation felt ridiculous, yet he couldn't escape it. He threaded himself back onto Black Lion Lane with long, decisive strides and settled into a stubborn resolve. If he encountered whoever had been dressing up, lurking, and scaring people, if some coward in a costume came out of a hedge, he would rush them, drag them into town by the collar if he had to, and make it plain you couldn't shoot or stab a ghost. If it could bleed or be beaten back, it had never been a phantom. Moving along the lane, he noticed a thick bush set off from the path, its shape like a crouched figure. Something about it snagged his attention. He slowed, peered into the dark, and saw a tiny movement behind the branches. Someone was crouched there. His body reacted before he could plan. He set his shoulders, curled his hands into fists, and sprinted toward the bush. Back in the house, Anne had been watching the window in the direction her brother had gone. Her mind replayed the warnings she'd heard. She leaned closer to the glass and focused on the darkness beyond. Then a scream split the night, abrupt and ragged, unmistakably a man's voice. She couldn't see her brother, but the sound seemed to come from his route. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed for the door and ran into the cold without even pulling a shawl tight. Around the same time, the pub door swung open and a group of men spilled out, voices loud with adrenaline and drink. They were not led by the night watchman, though he was among them, but by the town's tax collector, Francis Smith. Rumpled, hair awry, breath quick, he was an unlikely leader for a night sweep of the lanes. Yet he set the pace, and the others followed onto Black Lion Lane, scanning the shadowed edges of the road. A few steps in, they slowed in unison. A figure lay in the road, motionless. Crouched over the body was a dark shape, hunched and still, then lifting its head with a sound so full of pain it seemed animal. The men pulled back. The night watchman broke away, ran to the crouched figure, and tackled it, knocking both sideways into the cold dirt. The rest rushed to the body, reaching out with care, hoping for breath or a pulse. In seconds, it was clear the person was beyond help. They exchanged looks that said the same thing. This must be the ghost's work. It even seemed likely the crouched figure the watchman had tackled was the Hammersmith ghost itself. Their earlier bravado flickered. What had unfolded minutes earlier was more complicated. When Thomas saw movement behind the bush, he was right that a person, not a ghost, was crouched there. But it wasn't his quarry. It was Francis Smith. He had concealed himself to wait for the Hammersmith ghost, hoping to jump out and either capture or kill it and claim the reward. His situation mirrored Thomas's in one way and split in another. Both were looking for a person. Only Francis believed the thing he hunted might be supernatural. A darker coincidence pushed the moment toward catastrophe. That night, Thomas wore his all-white work clothes. In the dim light, they took on a pale glow. Francis, keyed up by fear and convinced the ghost might drift from the cemetery at any time, saw the white figure bearing down and concluded it was the Hammersmith ghost. Both moved toward each other, one sure he was closing in on a prankster, the other sure he was about to be attacked by what he feared. Francis had brought a rifle. He raised it and fired at close range. The shot struck Thomas in the face and killed him instantly. Shaking hard, unsure what he had done, Francis believed he had shot the ghost. He didn't step forward to examine the body. Instead, he spun and ran toward the pub, burst through the door, and shouted that he had shot the ghost. Within moments, a group formed and headed back out, Francis leading. By then, Anne had reached her brother. She recognized his clothing, then his shape, then his face, and her mind refused to accept what she was seeing, even as her voice filled the lane with a keening grief. She bent over him, hands hovering, afraid to confirm what she already knew. From a distance, the watchman mistook that posture, a dark figure crouched over a body, as the threat everyone had been chasing, and tackled her before realizing who she was. The men surrounding the scene put the details together quickly. The person on the ground was Thomas. The figure who had cried out was his sister. The ghost was nowhere in the road because there had never been a ghost in the road. In the days that followed, the details circulated through Hammersmith with speed and sting. Neighbors told neighbors. The pub hummed with relived moments and second-guessing. Everyone knew Francis Smith, and the notion that the tax collector had been crouched behind a bush with a rifle sent the town into a new set of questions. On January 11, 1804, Francis Smith stood trial. A jury found him guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to death. 5 weeks later, the King of England intervened. Francis was pardoned, and his sentence was shortened to a single year. The decision didn't erase what had happened, but it opened a long debate that lasted more than 150 years. What do you do with a person who harms someone while acting under a belief that turns out to be wrong? The Hammersmith ghost incident pushed courts toward a modern principle that allows self-defense if a person truly and reasonably believes they are in danger, even if that appraisal is mistaken. None of it brought Thomas back to his family. But the town did learn who had been responsible for the incidents that had paralyzed them with fear after the butcher's son had already been caught and scolded for his prank. The true identity of the Hammersmith ghost, the figure blamed for the string of sightings and attacks, apart from that first foolish cemetery lark, was the town's shoemaker. He confessed after Thomas's death. He said he wanted revenge on his apprentices because they had badly frightened his children by telling them ghost stories. He repaid that fear by wrapping the entire town in it. For Thomas, the arc of the story had been infuriating long before he stepped into the pub that evening. He disliked the way rumors hollowed out a community, how fear sent people reaching for weapons and wild imaginings. His plan that night was simple: warm by his parents' fire, then meet his wife. The path shifted because two people misread each other in the dark. That is the most unforgiving detail: speed and terror, costume and coincidence, and the distance between belief and fact collapsing in a second. If you pull back to the beginning, to those first stories of a figure lurking among the graves, you can almost see another version of events. In that version, the butcher's son's confession ends the chatter. People tell him he's an idiot and move on. But that is not how people work when primed to see patterns and respond to fright. By the time the chimney sweep spoke about a shape disappearing into the ground, listeners were ready to treat uncertainty as evidence. After the choking account and the bizarre carriage story, with 8 horses and 16 passengers left in the road, the atmosphere in Hammersmith had changed so completely that people like the 2 men on the lane with a club and a pistol felt called to defend their neighbors with and without sanction. The pregnant woman's death changed the tenor of every conversation. A white flowing robe, a long pointed white hat, a figure rising from the ground. These were the details that stuck, not because they proved anything, but because they captured the exact texture of the fear people carried. The town's response, the reward, stepped-up patrols, night watchmen conferring with residents who formed ad hoc possess, was an attempt to substitute action for dread. Some of it came from a sincere desire to solve what frightened them, some from anger. The line between those impulses blurred. It isn't hard to see why Francis tucked himself behind a bush on Black Lion Lane with his rifle. He imagined he might end what people had been talking about for weeks, confront what others only speculated about, and stop it before it harmed another person. He didn't count on someone like Thomas in all-white work clothes rushing toward him. The moment their paths locked was the moment no one could recover. Later, people said Francis looked disheveled and out of breath as he led the men from the pub down into the lane, a contrast to his daytime job. He didn't look like the type to lead a crowd or be swept up in a hunt. What the group thought they saw in the road, a dark something crouched over a body, was exactly the kind of glance that keeps rumors alive. In gossip, that scene would be perfect, terrifying, irrefutable. The truth was mundane and heartbreaking. A sister had reached her brother and was trying to absorb what she was seeing. A watchman took a risk and tackled a figure without considering that grief can look feral. The relief when they realized the black shape was not an otherworldly creature, but a local woman keening over her brother, did not undo the pain or the mistake. What happened afterward, the arrest, the verdict, the death sentence, and the king's intervention 5 weeks later, hit like lightning strikes. People debated publicly and privately. The case forced conversations about belief and responsibility. If a person genuinely thinks they face a deadly threat, how do you weigh what they do in those seconds? Over more than 150 years, that question was shaped into a point of law that reaches far beyond a single dark lane in Hammersmith. The shoemaker's confession added the last piece. He had not counted on a man like Thomas, skeptical, exasperated, and unlucky, crossing paths with a man like Francis, determined, frightened, and armed. He meant to frighten the town to make a point to apprentices who had terrified his children. A chain of bad ideas ended with a family kneeling in the road and a town hollowed out by loss. In one sense, the old rhythms of Hammersmith eventually returned. People reopened their doors earlier, the streets filled with the usual bustle. Life folded back over the scar left by that winter. In another sense, the story is still told because it illustrates a truth as current now as then. Once fear gathers momentum, it can pull good people into terrible mistakes. You can watch the same events from multiple angles and emerge with different convictions about what was seen and what was believed. A community can be haunted by a ghost that does not exist and still suffer real harm. If Thomas had left the pub in a better mood, perhaps he would have walked a different route. If Anne had heard him decide to stay by the fire, perhaps she would have coaxed him to wait longer. If Francis had set his gun aside or lit a lantern, perhaps the blur of white would have resolved into a man's face and not the outline of a specter. None of those things happened. What happened instead is what people in Hammersmith lived with and what the rest of the country read about. A moment of misrecognition, a shot fired, and a set of lessons that would take a century and a half to distill into a clear statement about self-defense and reasonable belief. The legend of the Hammersmith ghost survives, not because it describes some immortal thing stalking the lanes, but because it captures how human beings meet fear. A prank can become a legend. A legend can become a justification. A justification can turn into a tragedy. By the time people remembered that ghosts do not answer to bullets, they were standing by a body they recognized, with the night air filled by a sister's grief. In the middle of that, everything else, rumor and bravado, arguments from the pub, decisions made at a door, felt thin. The names that surface, Thomas Millwood, Anne, Francis Smith, are not villains in separate boxes. They are people who moved through a difficult winter and found themselves at odds with the fear around them. The lanes of Hammersmith and the track of Black Lion Lane still exist, ordinary places with ordinary traffic. On a quiet night, you wouldn't think anything this heavy had happened there. But the case reverberates in courtrooms and at dinner tables because it asks people to admit how easily darkness and worry can twist judgment. If there's one part of this story to carry forward, it's that trying to pin dread to something you can touch, a figure in white, a horned creature, a crouched shadow, won't always make you safer. Sometimes it will make you more dangerous to those around you and to yourself. That isn't an argument against protecting your neighbors. It's a reminder to ask careful questions about what is real, to look twice before you react, and to hold tightly to the difference between a rumor and a fact, between a costume and a person, between a hunch and a truth. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please like this source and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this delivered every week.